So there was kind of a vacancy for the artist to represent like the bro who wants to drink a few beers and push mosh at the summer music festivals. What's up everybody, I'm Finn McKenty, this is the Punk Rock MBA, and let me start by asking you a simple question. If I showed you a picture of this and this, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? I'm willing to bet that it is Fred Durst. And Fred Durst is one of those people that everybody seems to hate, and yet his accomplishments in music speak for themselves. Limp Bizkit were the biggest band in nu metal, he was the biggest star in the genre. So the big question is, if everybody hates Fred Durst so much and he's such a talentless hack, why is he so damn successful? Is it possible that maybe he's been playing 4D chess this whole time while the rest of us are just over here playing checkers? I think it might be, and I will explain exactly why in this video. But first, I wanted to mention that I've teamed up with Jared Alonji, who you may know from the Every Vocalist in Pop Punk video, among other things, for some new merch, which I think is pretty cool. There's a link to that in the description. And also, I want to thank Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. As you probably know, Raid Shadow Legends is a turn-based RPG that's among the very deepest, most complex mobile games around. There's over 500 champions to collect, each with their own skill tree. Personally, what I like the most is how much you can geek out on equipping your champions and optimizing them. My personal favorite champion is Hexweaver. She's a dark elf that I've had since the beginning. And within the last couple of weeks, they've actually added quite a few updates. First, they just added champion fragments. These are pieces of champions that you can then use to summon specific champions. There's a special event running right now to get the amazing Kreela Witch Arm, and it ends on August 28th, so don't wait around. There's also a new bazaar where you can load up on high value items with the gold bars you win in the tag arena. And they just extended the daily login rewards for 270 days, with free champions available just for logging in. You can find me in-game under the name PRMBA, and if you're quick enough, maybe you can join my clan. Just go to the video description, click on the special links, and if you're a new player, you will get 100,000 silver and one free champion, called Channeler. But note, this reward is only available for the next 30 days. And all this treasure will be waiting for you right here. So good luck, and I'll see you there. And with that out of the way, let's get into it.
It's like being a rock star, and like, this is just great. I mean, it's just the best thing ever.
First of all, for anybody who maybe wasn't around then or forgot exactly how big Limp Bizkit were and what a huge star Fred Durst was, let me give you a quick recap. They've sold over 40 million albums. 3 of their 5 albums hit the Billboard Top 10, and despite being absolutely despised by pretty much every critic ever, they've actually won a shitload of awards over the years. And back in the late 90s and early 2000s, Fred Durst was just everywhere. Like, he was pretty much a mainstream pop star up there with like Justin Timberlake and Madonna. His famous duet with Christina Augilera is a great example of that. He was constantly on TRL. He was even in the gossip headlines sometimes for supposedly dating or hooking up with Britney Spears. I still don't know whether that is true or not, but kind of doesn't really matter. The fact that it was even rumored put him in a certain tier of like celebrity status. He made cameos in huge mainstream movies like Zoolander. And their performance at Woodstock 99 with the guy crowd surfing on the door and all that stuff is one of the most iconic moments in that whole generation of rock. There may be someone I'm forgetting here. If so, let me know in the comments, but I think he was kind of the last really mainstream star to come out of the metal scene. So how did it happen? How did Fred Durst, a relatively like normal looking kind of average guy from Jacksonville, Florida, go from playing in a local band to being a massive mainstream MTV star in just a few years? The answer is simple, because he knows how to play the game. And let me explain what I mean by that. I think the common perception of Fred Durst is that he's this like douchey knucklehead bro in a red hat that's kind of dumb, just walks around like he thinks he's God's gift to the world, but I think that is way, way off from reality. I think that he is actually a very intelligent, analytical guy who chose to play the part of that red hat knucklehead bro in Limp Bizkit just the same way as like Tom Hardy played the part of Venom in Spider-Man or whatever.
You bit somebody's head off.
And you might be saying, whoa, Finn, you were giving this guy way too much credit. You are reaching, but I'm really not. I mean, he pretty much says that in this interview.
If it's music that I do and I'm in Limp Bizkit, I own that. That's a side of me. But if it's film, it's different than Limp Bizkit. It is for me anyway.
So why would he do that? Why would he choose to adopt this persona of like that red hat wearing bro? It's because he understands what the vast majority of musicians just don't. That the single most valuable thing in the music industry is attention. In fact, I think if we were to be more honest, we would call it the attention industry, because that's really what it's about, not the music. Because remember, the music business is just that. It's a business. They are here for one thing and one thing only, and that is to make money. To sell records and streams and merch and tickets and VIP. At the end of the day, the music is just a product. I know that that sounds gross and crass to a lot of you, and I completely understand why. I'm not saying you shouldn't feel that way. I'm just saying that this is the way that the industry works, whether you like it or not. Show me the money! And the prerequisite for all of that is attention, because you can't sell somebody an album until they know it exists, right? And therefore, what the industry values more than anything else is people who know how to get attention. This is why Tekashi 6ix9ine has a career. It's not because he's a great musician. And I would say that is exactly where Fred Durst fits in. I'm sure he would agree that he is not the world's best musician by any means, but what he is really fucking good at is getting attention. And specifically, he understands that oftentimes the fastest route to fame is being disliked. And so for that reason, I don't think it's a coincidence at all that he was the most hated person in metal. I think that was his game plan from day one, going back to the very beginning of the band. And again, I'm not making this up. Like, these are his own words about naming the band. The name is there to turn people's heads away. A lot of people pick up the disc and go, Limp Bizkit, oh, they must suck. Those are the people that we don't even want listening to our music. Other names that were considered by Durst included Gimp Disco, Split Dick Slit, Bitch Piglet, and Blood Fart. Do you think he's ever like sitting at home at night going, man, I wish I would have called the band Split Dick Slit?
I've made a huge mistake.
Limp Bizkit is not the best name for a band, and what you see is that that was on purpose. And why would they do that? Because what he understood is that being hated or disliked is not the worst thing that can happen to an artist. The worst thing that can happen to you is being ignored. If you're a creator of any kind, then you know what I'm talking about. Just that feeling of putting all your time and energy into like making this thing, putting it out into the world, and then crickets. Nobody gives a shit. They don't love it, they don't hate it, they just don't care. It is a horrible feeling, right? I mean, that was me for the first almost year of this channel. I made like 100 videos and nobody gave a shit. And it felt terrible. If people hate your work, well, at least that means they care, right? So whether you love or hate Fred Durst, it really kind of doesn't matter. Either way, if he is living in your head rent-free, he's winning. Which brings us to the Red Hat Bro persona. If you turn back the clock to the 90s, alternative rock was still at the top of the charts. Pantera had 3 top 10 albums. Bands like Red Hot Chili Peppers and Rage Against the Machine were massive. But by the end of the 90s, it was kind of ready for a changing of the guard. Pantera had started to wind down as like personal problems and drugs and stuff took a toll on the band. Red Hot Chili Peppers had started to go pop. So there was kind of a vacancy for the artist to represent like the bro who wants to listen to some heavy shit, drink a few beers, and push mosh at the summer music festivals. And that left a perfect opening for Fred Durst to come in and fill that slot. And by the end of the 90s, he was that guy and Limp Bizkit was that band. He was that like belligerent white dude with a big mouth, just told everybody to fuck off, said whatever he wanted and pissed off all the critics and snobs along the way. Kind of reminds me of like the guys who I'd run into in high school at a bus stop that all of a sudden out of the blue would like get in your face and be like, what the fuck are you looking at? And you'd be like, nothing, I'm just waiting for the bus. And they're like, yeah, that's what I thought, bitch. He was sort of like the platonic ideal of that bro. Like he wasn't as edgy and extreme as Pantera had become. He had a little bit of that cool hip hop swagger, but he wasn't like an actual street dude who was catching bodies or anything. He was just that like universal bro that exists everywhere. Whether you live in like San Bernardino or Dayton or Orlando, like you know that guy. But is that really who Fred Durst is? Is he really that guy? I don't think he is. I mean, listen to this interview.
I don't love any movies that would resemble what Limp Bizkit sounds like or looks like or feels like. And that's just not what I respond to and cinematically.
Does that sound like your typical loudmouth dude bro who would start a fight at a bus stop to you? And remember, around this time, he was also a senior vice president at Interscope Records doing A&R, where he signed bands like Stained and Puddle of Mud. And whether you like those bands or not, they were definitely very successful on a commercial level. And you don't just give out SVP jobs to like random dumbass dude bros off the street. You can think what you want about his taste in music and about Limp Bizkit, but the guy clearly had a sharp sense for business and what would sell. Now, I'm not saying that the dude bro persona is like totally fake or manufactured or anything like that, because I don't think it is. I think that guy is one part of who Fred Durst is, but only one part. And I don't think that's fake. I mean, we all do this, right? Like, you're one person to your boss, another person to your mom, and another person again to like your friends when you're out on the town and you had a couple drinks. Does that make you fake? No, it just means that we're multifaceted and we show different sides of ourselves depending on the situation. I think he just understood that when it comes to creating a personal brand for yourself, which at the end of the day is what celebrities do, there's no room for nuance. Like, people just want you to be one thing. For example, like Gordon Ramsay is the chef that yells at people, Simon Cowell is the guy that crushes people's dreams on American Idol, and I'm sure if you know those guys personally, there's a lot more to them than that. Sure, Gordon Ramsay just doesn't run around all the time screaming at everybody.
I ask the fucking questions, you give the fucking answers.
But as far as their publicly facing brand is concerned, they're just that guy. And knowing that, he chose that like Chad dude bro part of himself to be his brand, and fully committed to that the same way as any corporation would commit to their brand. Like McDonald's has the golden arches and the red and the yellow, and they don't just wake up one day and be like, I'm sick of the red and yellow, let's be purple and green today. That's not how you build a brand. You pick a thing and you stick to it. And to continue that analogy, I actually think his red hat is a great example of this. It's a simple little thing, but just like I said at the beginning of the video, think about how closely tied he is to that hat. He owned the red hat as part of his personal brand just the same way as McDonald's owns the golden arches. It may seem ridiculous, but honestly, something as simple as that can be a really important part of a great personal brand. For example, like Hayley Williams and her orange hair, or Jonathan Davis's Adidas tracksuits, or Anthony Fantano's flannels. So I don't think the hat thing was an accident at all. I think he was very aware of how powerful that can be, and it was a conscious piece of brand building on his part. Look at the video for Break Stuff, for example, which he directed.
Right now I'm dangerous.
The entire premise of the video is people dressed like him and acting like him. The whole video is basically like reinforcing his brand as like that dude bro with the red hat. And speaking of directing, I think a lot of people aren't aware that he actually has a pretty legit background as a film director. He directed most of the Limp Bizkit videos, as well as videos for artists like Korn and Stain and Dwight Yoakam. He's done like 3 or 4 feature films with legit Hollywood stars in them, like Jesse Eisenberg and Ice Cube and John Travolta, and even a few commercials for companies like eHarmony. Now, I'm not saying he's the next Steven Spielberg. I haven't watched any of the movies, but from the trailers, they look, you know, pretty average, and they did not get great reviews. But you don't get to make a movie with John Travolta or Ice Cube if you completely suck. So the point here is not that he's like the world's best director, it's just that the guy clearly understands character and narrative and how to tell a story. And I think he essentially thought of his persona in Limp Bizkit as the character and the band as the movie, if that makes sense. And I think he also knows where he's not super strong, which is on the musical side of things. With all due respect to him, I'm sure he would agree that he is not a great musician himself, but he does have a great ear for talent. That's why he was able to discover bands like Stained and Puddle of Mud, and why he was able to find and recruit some really exceptional musicians to be in Limp Bizkit. Wes Borland is a super innovative, creative guy that I think was kind of the driving force behind the music of Limp Bizkit. And then you've got Sam Rivers and John Otto, who are one of the absolute tightest rhythm sections in the genre. I'm not a huge Limp Bizkit fan, but I could listen to John Otto play drums all day.
John Otto, take him to the Matthews Bridge.
He kind of reminds me of Mike Muir of Suicidal Tendencies, who again is not a great musician himself, but throughout the history of the band has always had just absolutely top tier people in his band. So his role is not necessarily to be the musical talent himself, but to be the curator who brings together great musical talent. Which brings us to the second big key to his success, his ability to work the media. The guy's great at this. Like I said earlier, he was everywhere back then. The covers of magazines, awards shows, TV news segments, like half the shows on MTV on any given day. If you hated Fred Durst, the late 90s and early 2000s were not a fun time for you. And I think that's a huge part of what made him such a big star, just that absolute media saturation. His face in mainstream media all the time. And why did the media give him so many of those opportunities? Well, it's not because he's some great, exciting, electrifying speaker, and it's not because he's freakishly beautiful like Justin Bieber or something. So why? For one, because he understands something that most musicians don't, that if you want to be in the news, you have to do something newsworthy. A lot of baby bands don't understand this. Like, they put out a press release announcing that they've put out their debut EP, and then they wonder why nobody's picking it up and writing about it. But if you think about it, with all due respect, why would anybody write about it? Some no-name band putting out their debut EP is not news. Fred Durst understood that and learned how to create things that were newsworthy. You can almost think of him as like the new metal growth hacker, because he was just consistently doing things that enabled him and the band to plug into this media machine. For example, I think it was on Ozfest that their stage set was this giant toilet that they would come out of to kind of play on the fact that everybody hated them and thought they were shit. Or the thing that put them on the map in the first place, which was their cover of Faith by George Michael. You remember that song, Faith? Some band did like a metal cover of it. You gotta check it out. This is a very well-known tactic now. Like every fucking band on the planet tries to get famous on the back of like a metal cover of a pop song. But back then it was pretty much unheard of. I'm not sure if they were the very first ones to do it, but they're the first ones that I can think of, and it worked. That cover is what got them their first original little bit of traction that they were able to turn into the rest of their career. Another thing they did that was very ahead of their time is features, getting other artists to be in their song. Like if you look at Significant Other, they have a ton of features on that album. Jonathan Davis from Korn, Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots, Aaron Lewis of Stained, Method Man. Fred also featured on a lot of other artists like Run DMC, for example, and every one of those is something for the media to talk about. Rap and rock collide when legendary rapper Method Man does a song with Limp Bizkit.
Let me hear your pigeons run your mouth now. Shut the fuck up.
Again, this is something that bands do now all the time, but back in 1999, that was pretty much unheard of. So again, I think you can give Fred and Limp Bizkit a lot of credit for pioneering this trend. And I think it worked. Fred Durst and Limp Bizkit got a very disproportional amount of media coverage back then as compared to their peers like, say, Korn or POD. And I think that was instrumental to their success.
But don't you forget you're in the zone, so shut the fuck up.
So to sum it all up and answer the original question of why is Fred Durst the biggest star in nu metal despite also being like the most hated guy in the whole genre and far from the best musician? Because he understands how the game is played. He understands how to create a polarizing persona, pull together a team of amazing musicians that are strong where he's weak, and work the media to get himself and his band in the public eye again and again and again. He understands the attention economy. And here's the one thing I really want you to think about, especially if you're one of the people that hates Fred Durst, or for that matter hates like the Kardashians or Jake Paul or any of these other kind of obnoxious assholes that are super famous basically for being obnoxious assholes. Around the way that Fred Durst used the fact that people hated him and his band to their advantage. Because I think it actually says a lot about why our society is in the place that it's in right now.
We've all felt like this and been treated like this.
There's something in psychology called negativity bias, which essentially refers to the idea that we respond to and retain negative information more than we do positive information. And from an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Like, it's more important for you to remember where the saber-toothed tiger lives so he doesn't eat you than it is to remember how good an apple tastes. That served us well in the year 50,000 BC or whatever when we were living in caves, but it does not serve us so well today in a modern society in the age of social media. Because it creates a system in which people are incentivized to be assholes, basically. Like, why do Tekashi 6ix9ine and Jake Paul act the way that they do? Like obnoxious idiots. Because when they act that way, people pay attention to them, people click on their videos, which means that they make more money. So why wouldn't they act that way? What would happen if all of a sudden Jake Paul or 6ix9ine decided to act like mature, reasonable, calm adults? Their careers would be over. And why does so much of the so-called news media produce like shitty, rage-baiting, fake news clickbait instead of actual journalism? Because that's what people click on, and they've got a business to run. Again, that's what they're incentivized to do. And I can speak to that from personal experience too. On my channel, pretty much any video with a negative title, for example, like top 10 worst fandoms in rock and metal, is always gonna do the best. Negative videos almost always do better than positive ones. And I don't really like that because I don't want to put negative energy out into the world, but it's kind of hard not to go there because it works. And if I don't do it, someone else will, and I've got bills to pay. So if you're one of these people that finds Fred Durst or any of these other people like Jake Paul or the Kardashians or whatever obnoxious and you roll your eyes like, why do we let these people become celebrities? Well, I say, don't blame them. They're just giving the people what they want. Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Limp Bizkit style.
All right, my friends, that does it for this video on Fred Durst. As always, I would love to know what you think in the comments, and let me know who else you would like me to talk about in this series. Also, I wanted to remind you about the new merch we just dropped with Jared Alonji. I'm a big fan of the Pantera rip. There's a link to that in the description. Also, if you haven't checked out the Punk Rock NBA podcast, I would love it if you would. There's a new episode on Monday. This is where I sit down with musicians and artists and creators of any other kind, talk about how they were able to turn their passion into their living. And as always, I want to thank the people who support us on Patreon, especially the people who support us at the true cult level or above. Patrons get access to every episode of the podcast a week early. There's a patron-only private Discord server that I'm in all the time. There's an opportunity to have me review your band or your YouTube channel or your design portfolio or any other thing that you want to get in front of me and get my feedback on. So if that sounds interesting, you can check that out at the link in the description. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.